now we're going to continue this unit on animal ethics with a discussion of humane farming. Norcross was criticizing factory farming. He wanted to show that it's really terrible. Of course, kind of the most obvious thing that's wrong with it is that it causes immense suffering to the animals, right? His analogy was with Fred, this guy who is sort of torturing and mutilating these puppy dogs. And you might think, well, okay. So, causing immense suffering to animals for no good reason, yeah, that seems pretty wrong. But, okay, I mean, couldn't we in principle raise animals humanely, give them nice lives, kill them as painlessly as possible, maybe in a way that's less painless than a natural death would be, you know? And if we do that, would that be okay? And we're assuming here that we're talking about, it's one thing if you're stranded on a desert island, and, your only source of food is fish or something, or maybe you're living in, some modern community that is in the developing world somewhere, and your main source of protein is fish, or you're someone who has, some very specific set of dietary requirements such that it is very hard for you to be healthy without animal protein or something like that. Maybe all those questions, those sorts of situations are not what we're thinking of here, right? We're thinking of the kind of situation that, most people in wealthy nations nowadays are in. Where really they could survive perfectly well without eating animal products, if they replaced meat with beans or lentils or whatever. Got their protein that way, chickpeas. They could survive perfectly well in that way. They just don't really want to because they like eating animal products, right? And the question is, for those of us in that situation, we can survive perfectly well without animal products, but maybe we would like to eat them. Is it okay to kill animals for food? Not out of necessity, but just because, that's a source of food that you enjoy or something. Is it okay to do that, provided you give the animals nice lives first? We'll focus primarily on the question of meat, I guess, because it's the most obvious example of killing animals for food. You might think other sorts of animal products, though, might be relevantly similar. Egg and dairy production, these sorts of things, because oftentimes they involve killing animals too, just for different reasons. We talked last time about the fact that egg production often, generally they kill the baby male chicks because they don't have any use for them. And even, humane egg producers often, well, in fact, basically in the U.S., I think any large industrial scale egg producer does that, right? Maybe not if you are getting chickens from your friend who has them in his backyard or something like that. But so lots of industries kill animals to produce animal products besides just the meat industry. But maybe that's kind of the paradigm case. And our question is this okay? Is it okay to kill animals for food, provided you give them a nice life first, when that isn't necessary for your health? And there's an argument. This is Peter Singer again. You'll remember him, his nice smile there. Peter Singer has provided what's called the replaceability argument, and that suggests that maybe humane farming for meat is okay. We'll see. He has a few reservations, but we'll see how this argument goes. Now, you might be surprised to hear this because Singer actually endorses, you remember Norcross, when he was talking about the argument for marginal cases, Norcross wanted to endorse the view that human and animal interests are equally important, right? And Singer endorses that view as well. In fact, Singer is the foremost defender and pioneer of that view. Norcross, I think, got it from Singer. So you might think, wait a minute, if Singer is this big animal rights guy, and he is extremely against factory farming, this sort of stuff, if he's this big animal rights guy, how is it that he might be okay with humane meat farming? Well, he is an act utilitarian, okay? So he thinks morality is all about maximizing well-being. And that is, you know, that was really what underlies his views about things like charitable giving, right? You know, well, if you have more than you need, somebody else doesn't have as much as they need, there will be more well-being if you give some of your stuff to them, etc. He's an act utilitarian. He thinks morality is about maximizing well-being. He accepts what we call the desire theory of well-being. The reading calls it the preference satisfaction theory, and those mean the same thing. Desire and preference mean the same thing here. So he accepts the desire theory of well-being that we talked about earlier in this course. And that means he thinks that well-being consists in having your desires frustrated, in having your desires satisfied, and harm consists in having them frustrated. So you're better off the more desire satisfaction you have, you're worse off the more desire frustration you have. Okay? So for Singer, morality is about maximizing well-being. Well-being consists in desire satisfaction. So there are two reasons why killing somebody might be wrong, in general. Just killing a person might be wrong, right? It might reduce the amount of desire satisfaction, or it might increase the amount of desire frustration. Okay? Might reduce, you know, if somebody kills you, then you miss out on future desire satisfaction that would have been in your life. It might also increase desire frustration, and we'll see why. First of all, if you kill people, that increases desire frustration because you know, it makes other people scared and stuff, right? And it makes your friends sad and your family sad. They don't like those feelings. They don't like it that you died. So they're now having desires frustrated, right? That decreases well-being. We're assuming that you're killed painlessly. Of course, if you're killed painfully, then that's another frustrated desire for you, right? But second, if somebody kills you painlessly in your sleep, that frustrates your future-directed desires. And this is one of the main ways in which death might be harmful for you. What is a future-directed desire? Well, it's just a desire about how the future goes, right? It's future-directed, meaning it's directed towards the future. It's a desire about the future. So you might have a desire to continue living. You might also have other desires which require that you continue living. You have projects, you have plans, you have hopes and dreams about the future. There are things that you want to do. You might want to graduate from college. You might want to pass this class. You might want to find a significant other, get married, have kids, you know, go into a certain field, become successful in your field. You know, all sorts of things that you might want to do in the future, right? And generally speaking, if you die, you're not going to accomplish any of those. A huge part of what you desire is not just about your condition at this present moment. Some of your desires are about that. You don't want to be too hot and that, you know, that kind of thing. But a huge part of what you desire really is about the future. And if you die, then all those desires are going to get frustrated. So that's a very serious harm for the desire theorist. So to review, 2 ways that killing you increases the amount of harm in the world. First of all, can make other people sad, disappointed that you died, whatever. Frustrates their desires that you continue to live. Second of all, frustrates your own future-directed desires that you, survive and do various things and experience various things in the future. Will killing animals make other animals scared or sad? I mean, it might in the case of some social animals. I think cows have friends, sort of, for instance. Maybe they could miss their friends. I guess you could kill the whole herd at once, and you could get away with that, away from that. But in general, animals aren't going to realize that you're raising them to kill them or anything like that. They're at least not going to be nearly as scared as people are going to become if there's a murderer around or something like that. Do animals have future-directed desires? I mean, if that's kind of the main reason that killing you harms you, do animals have future-directed desires like you do? And here, Singer draws a distinction between what we can call self-conscious beings and merely conscious beings. Here, really, I should even have these terms in italics, because they're quite significant, really. Self-conscious beings and merely conscious beings. Self-conscious beings are aware of themselves as distinct individuals with pasts and futures. You are a self-conscious being. You are aware that you are an individual who persists throughout time. You are aware that, one day you were born and you've gone through various things in your life. You understand the passage of time. You understand that you're going to continue progressing into the future. You understand that one day you'll die and there are various things you want to do before then and blah, 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 right? A merely conscious being is not like that for Singer. Maybe a fly, for instance, is not like that. Maybe a fly just lives totally in the moment, right? It's just flying around, buzzing around, responding to stimuli. It doesn't have any sense of like, I am a fly, I was born one day, I am progressing through time, whatever, right? Singer thinks that being self-conscious in this sense, being aware of yourself as a distinct individual progressing through time with a past and a future, that is necessary for you to have future-directed desires. He thinks if you don't even, you're not even aware of the fact that you exist, or of the fact that you're passing through time, or of the fact that you have a future, then how are you going to form desires about that future? How are you going to think, tomorrow I want to go eat some hay or whatever, if you don't even have a concept of yourself or of tomorrow, or of anything other than just what you're doing at this moment, right? And so, if you're a merely conscious being, you might have preferences about your current state. If something, unpleasant is happening to you, you'll want, I want that to stop. But you won't, for Singer, have desires about the future. You're just kind of living totally in the moment. And so, it's bad to cause you pain. This is why Singer thinks that factory farming is really bad. It's bad to cause you pain in the moment. You don't like that. But you couldn't be harmed by death in the way that a self-conscious being can be, because for Singer, you don't have desires about the future. And so he thinks painlessly killing a merely conscious being doesn't harm them, or it doesn't harm them at least in the same way that it harms a self-conscious being. Now, which animals, if any, are merely conscious? he used to think that a lot of them were merely conscious. I think he's actually become a little more hesitant about that over time. He thinks that great apes and chimpanzees and things, they actually are self-conscious in his view. He's actually supported efforts to try to get them declared legal persons who it would be wrong to kill. He thinks that fish are at least the most likely individuals to be merely conscious out of the animals that you routinely eat. Other animals he's not sure about. He says, lots of people seem to think that dogs and cats have desires about the future. I think he's not totally sure, but, if they do, then pigs probably do, maybe chickens do. So he's not totally sure about this. But it is, you might think it's obvious. Animals want to live, don't they? So isn't it obvious that they must, if the desire to live is a future-directed desire, isn't it obvious that they have future-directed desires? Singer thinks that's not obvious, so he has a little passage where he talks about, a fish with a hook in its mouth and it's struggling. And maybe you think, okay, the fish wants to live, right? Clearly the fish is struggling to survive. Singer thinks, well, maybe not. Maybe what's happening is the fish is experiencing an unpleasant stimulus. It doesn't like the hook in its mouth. That's painful. It wants that to stop. Maybe it's scared. It finds the situation frightening. It doesn't know what's happening. It wants that to stop. So it's struggling against the stimulus. Maybe there's even some sense in which, it has a survival instinct in the moment. Maybe you think it doesn't want to die in that moment or something. But he's thinking, well, maybe even if it doesn't want to die, it's not really because it wants to survive into the future. It doesn't have any sense of itself as an individual that could survive into the future. It's just, this very base instinct that, doesn't have anything more to it, I guess. Or at least he thinks that's realistically possible. You might think, well, if we're not sure whether, and again, maybe you disagree with Singer about fish, but I'm just saying what he says. You might think, well, okay, if we're not sure whether an individual is self-conscious or merely conscious, maybe we should play things safe. You shouldn't kill them and risk frustrating their future-directed desires. And he thinks, that makes sense, though at the same time, if, say, fish have future-directed desires, they're still probably not nearly as future-oriented as we are, right? If you think about your, all the different desires you have, a lot of your desires are about the future, and a lot of your weightiest desires are about the future, You're willing to do things that are very unpleasant in the moment if you think it will make you better off in the future, right? You're willing to listen to me drone on in this lecture if you think it will help you on the final exam or help you on the quiz or help you write your paper, right? Fish, if they have some future-directed desires, they're much more present-oriented than people are. And so he thinks, even where animals have, even if they do have future-directed desires, they're probably much less future-directed than human desires. And so killing them is probably much less harmful, right? It might be harmful, but it wouldn't be nearly as bad. And so, point being here, if a being is merely conscious, then you're not introducing any harm into the world by killing it, Singer thinks. We'll even put that in there too. Now, I said there were two ways for Singer that killing somebody could be wrong. It might reduce the amount of desire satisfaction or increase the amount of desire frustration. Well, he's thinking it might be that killing some animals doesn't increase the amount of desire frustration, but, well, okay, that animal still might have had desire satisfaction in its future. You know, it could have gone around and laid in the sun and eaten hay and blah, blah, blah. Aren't you decreasing the amount of happiness in the world if you kill the animal? And this is why the argument is called the replaceability argument. He wants to argue that merely conscious beings are replaceable in the sense that if you kill one and then you replace it with a new individual that's equally happy, that isn't morally bad. So he thinks if you kill some animal that is merely conscious and then, being a farmer, you breed a new animal to replace it, that's what farmers do, right? Well, as long as there's another equally happy animal that's going to take its place, the amount of desire satisfaction doesn't decrease, so that's okay. So he says, when we come to animals that, as far as we can tell, lack self-awareness, the best direct reason against killing points to the loss of a pleasant or enjoyable life. They don't have desires you're going to frustrate by killing them, but you make them miss out on what might have been a nice rest of their life. But even when the animal would have lived pleasantly, it's arguable that no wrong is done if the animal killed will, as a result of the killing, be replaced by another animal living an equally pleasant life. Thus, it is possible to regard merely conscious animals as interchangeable with one another in a way that beings with a sense of their own future, like you and I, are not. This means that in some circumstances, when animals lead pleasant lives or kill painlessly, their deaths do not cause suffering to other animals, and the killing of one animal makes possible its replacement by another that would not otherwise have lived. The killing of animals without self-awareness is not wrong. So, if you have a humane farm, the animals live pleasant lives, you kill them painlessly, they don't have, their friends aren't made sad, and you replace them with new animals who also lead pleasant lives. Killing them isn't for meat or whatever isn't wrong. Is it possible along these lines to justify raising any animals for their meat, not in factory farm conditions, but roaming freely around a farmyard? Factory farms, you're causing pain, and even merely conscious beings don't like that, right? They don't like to suffer. So it can't justify factory farming, but could it justify raising animals that can, roam freely around a farmyard and do fun stuff? Suppose we could be confident that chickens, for example, are not aware of themselves as existing over time. And this assumption is questionable. This is that part I mentioned a minute ago when he says, like, well, people think dogs and cats are. If they are, maybe chickens are too, blah, blah, blah. But just suppose it turns out that chickens are merely conscious, based on our best science or whatever. And assume that the chickens can be killed painlessly, and the other chickens are not sad when one of them dies. And assume that, you couldn't raise these chickens if you weren't going to eat them, because it wouldn't make economic sense. Then the replaceability argument appears to justify killing the birds because depriving them of the pleasures of their existence can be offset against the pleasures of chickens who do not yet exist, and will exist only if the existing chickens are killed. In other words, it's okay to kill these chickens, assuming all these conditions I just said are met. It's okay to kill these chickens and replace them with new, equally happy chickens, because killing the first ones makes room for a new, equally happy chicken, keeps the amount of happiness in the world the same, and, that's fine when you're dealing with merely conscious beings who aren't having desires about the future frustrated when they're killed. So, we, in the textbook that I co-authored, and really this means me because I wrote this chapter, we frame the argument like this. So this is our attempt to frame Singer's argument. Okay. If painlessly killing an individual is wrong, it's because doing so either reduces the amount of desire satisfaction or increases the amount of desire frustration. Painlessly killing a merely conscious being does not reduce the amount of desire satisfaction, so long as it allows you to replace it with another equally well-off being, and you do so. This is the replaceability part. You kill the one chicken, but that means you can raise another chicken. Painlessly killing a merely conscious being does not increase the amount of pain or desire frustration, so they don't have future directed desires that will be foiled if you kill them. They don't have hopes and dreams about the future that come to naught because you kill them. So there aren't those desires to be frustrated. Therefore, painlessly killing a merely conscious being is not wrong, as long as it allows you to replace it with another equally well-off being, and you do so. This is Singer's, in principle, defense of humane farming. Like I said, he's not totally sure which animals really are merely conscious, but that's that. There is a big worry for Singer's argument, though, and if you listen to my extra credit talk, or if you went to it, you might recognize this argument, because Singer's view is the one that I was arguing against, because it has this implication. There are some human beings, such as babies, who presumably, if, chickens or cows or whoever are not self-conscious, then babies aren't self-conscious either, right? I mean, do babies have a desire to, they have a concept of themselves as distinct individuals existing over time, and, they want to grow up and do all this stuff? But no, of course not, right? I mean, babies either don't have future-directed desires, or they just have very minimal ones. They want to continue to be warm or something like that. They're not heavily future-oriented in the way that most adult humans are. So would this imply that it's not wrong to kill a baby and replace it with a new baby? Or at least it's not very wrong. And Singer says yes, he actually agrees with that. He thinks, look, you shouldn't go around killing babies willy-nilly, just at random, because people are attached to babies and it will make them sad and stuff like that. But he thinks it's not apart from those sorts of it's not wrong apart from those sorts of considerations. In fact, suppose you have an unhealthy baby, and the baby's going to use a lot of medical resources, be kind of burdensome for other people, will not, have a terrible life, but just a decreased quality of life. In that case, he thinks ideally it would be better to kill the baby and try again, have another one that's healthier. Because, there's no harm done by killing the baby in that case. No harm done to the baby, because the baby doesn't have future-directed desires, or at least not very many. And, if you have another one, if you can replace the baby with another one, then, it's less burdensome for other people. The new kid maybe will be a little bit happier because they're healthier and stuff. So that's what Singer thinks. He thinks, yes, this argument I've given does justify infanticide in some cases. Not just randomly killing babies because you'll make people sad, but in some cases, yes, it justifies infanticide. He thinks, okay, look, I know that you're going to think that this is a terrible consequence. You're going to think that this refutes my view. But he thinks this is just sort of a cultural prejudice that you have. Some cultures practice infanticide. And he thinks, well, really the reason that we in the contemporary West regard infanticide as so categorically terrible is that we have this Christian heritage that condemned infanticide. And he's an atheist, he's not a Christian, and he thinks, well, maybe now we can finally overcome this superstitious bias that we have and realize that, killing babies is not nearly as bad as we thought it was. But, most philosophers have not been convinced by Singer. there's gonna be a lot of discussion of whether it's okay to kill infants in coming lectures, actually, because these fundamental questions about moral status get raised again and again, and one test case is always babies. But most philosophers think, okay, maybe there's something wrong with Singer's argument. And this is what I argued in my extra credit talk. So if you want to hear my response to Singer's position on infanticide, maybe you already heard it if you went, or you can go listen to it. In any event, you might think this shows that there's something. If you aren't convinced by Singer that, well, maybe it's not so bad to think that infanticide is okay, then you might think this shows that there has to be something wrong with Singer's argument, right? And so you might wonder, okay, if supposing we think that there is something wrong with Singer's argument, we think, no, infants have a right to life, unlike what Singer thinks. Is there any other way of defending humane farming? And there are other ways. In fact, there are two other ways. So the second way, the first way was Singer's, and then there are two more. So there are three total that we're going to talk about. The second way is what's called the logic of the larder argument. And the basic idea behind this argument is, well, look, humanely farmed animals have good lives on balance. Okay. They wouldn't exist without humane farming, right? Like, they got bred by the farmer to raise them so that they could be killed for meat or whatever. So really, they have nothing to complain about when they get humanely farmed, right? This whole system, this whole practice is good for them because it brings them into existence and they have nice lives. Maybe too bad that they get killed at the end, but that's the price you gotta pay, And so this argument thinks, well, look, the practice benefits them on the whole, and so nothing wrong with it. It's a little hard to spell out exactly what the argument here is. We go through a number of different attempts to formulate it in our chapter. You might think, here's a first pass. Okay, if a practice benefits an individual, it doesn't wrong them. And that seems sort of plausible at first glance, right? If some practice is good for you and it doesn't wrong you, you should want it to happen. Humanely farming animals for meat benefits them, since they wouldn't exist otherwise and they have lives worth living. Okay. Makes sense. Humanely farming them for meat is what causes them to come to exist, and they have good lives. So, therefore, humanely farming animals for meat doesn't wrong them. But this argument is not right. P1 is false. Here, I'll put this. Sorry, these are new slides, so I keep noticing little bits that I should phrase differently or something. So suppose we have this practice. Whenever somebody is drowning, we sing a nice hymn to comfort them as they die. We all get together and sing a nice hymn. Okay. Well, if the hymn succeeds in comforting them, I guess that benefits them, at least as compared to our doing nothing, right? We benefit them by singing the nice hymn. But the problem with this practice is we should instead do something else that benefits them more, right? There's another practice that's better for them, namely the practice of saving them from drowning. You might think humane farming is like that. Okay, it does benefit them, but the thing that would benefit them the most would be if you brought them into existence and then didn't kill them. So maybe that's what you should do, right? And maybe we think, well, okay, but here's the thing. you're obligated to rescue the drowning person, right? You're not going above and beyond what you're obligated to do by singing the hymn, because actually you're obligated to save them from drowning. But you're not obligated to breed happy animals. You know, I don't run a farm, and that's fine, right? So maybe that's the difference. So maybe really the argument is something like this. Look, if practice X is better for someone than practice Y, and practice Y doesn't wrong them, then practice X doesn't wrong them. So if I say, look, here's something that I could have permissibly done, and in fact what I'm doing is something that is better for you than this other thing that I could have permissibly done, then I haven't wronged you by doing this other thing that's better for you. Well, humanely farming animals for meat is better for them than not breeding them at all. And not breeding them at all wouldn't wrong them. We didn't have an obligation to breed them. So humanely farming animals for meat doesn't wrong them. This premise one in this argument is also false, though, or at least pretty plausibly false. So consider a case like this. You have been poisoned, and the poison is going to cause you to lose both of your arms. Okay, and I have the antidote for the poison. And I can come give you the antidote, but I have to run through a hail of bullets to do it, okay? So it's extremely risky for me to do it. And if I do it, then I can either give you half the antidote and you can save one of your arms, or I can give you the whole antidote and save both of your arms. And there's no reason not to give you the whole antidote, right? There's no additional cost. In that case, it might be permissible for me to do nothing. I don't have to run through the hail of bullets, maybe because that would be asking too much of me. But you might think, well, if I do run through the hail of bullets, I'm obligated to give you the antidote that saves both of your arms, right? Given that I have borne the cost and that I can save both of your arms for no additional cost, it seems like I should save both of your arms. So this principle is false. So maybe you don't necessarily need to know all of these individual different formulations. I mean, it's fine if you just know this one that we employ at the end. But I sort of go through these to sort of help you see what some of the difficulties in the background are, right? So maybe the argument really needs to be something like this. If practice X is better for an individual than practice Y, and Y doesn't wrong them, and any practice which is better for them than X is very costly to the people acting, then X doesn't wrong them. So humanely farming animals for meat is better for them than not breeding them, and not breeding them doesn't wrong them. And the only option which is better for them than humanely farming them for meat is very costly, because if you just breed these animals and then don't kill them for meat, it's going to be economically very bad for you, right? So humanely farming animals for meat doesn't wrong them. So that's the difference from this previous case, where I have no reason not to just give you the antidote that saves both your arms, right? When you raise the animal, if you don't kill it, then it's going to be very costly for you, right? Because your whole business model depends upon you killing the animals. So maybe that's the thing to say. Okay, I've already done better for this animal than I was obligated to do by breeding them and giving them a nice life. And doing more by not killing them would be very costly to me, and I'm not obligated to bear this additional cost. We could keep refining the argument. I'm sure you're done with that, though. Instead, we might look at a deeper worry. Would this justify farming babies for meat humanely? Well, Robert Nozick asks us to imagine this sort of situation. In some future society, we've made a law that says, look, you can only have 2 kids because of environmental reasons, or something like that, okay? But some people want to have a 3rd kid, so we make this rule. Okay, you can have a 3rd kid as long as you kill them before they're 3 years old. Yeah, you can have a 3rd kid, but like, people start having 3rd kids, going to be too many people around. So you can have one, but you know, you gotta kill them. Okay, well, you might think, look, if you have the kid and then kill them before they turn 3, you kill them painlessly, and you know, they don't know that you're going to do this maybe, so they're not scared or anything. I guess maybe that's better than not existing at all, right? Living for a couple years is just some kind of dumb little kid. Maybe that's better than not living at all. Not having the kid would be permissible. It doesn't seem like you're obligated to have the kid that you're going to kill. It would be too costly to let everybody have 3 kids normally. So wouldn't this principle seem to imply that for this society, instituting this practice of allowing people to have an extra kid as long as they kill the kid wouldn't imply that that was permissible? And doesn't that seem wrong, though? Doesn't it seem like it's not permissible? Well, Nozick suggests, yes, that practice definitely seems wrong. And that's because once the kid exists, the kid has a right to life. The kid has a right against being killed. And that's true even if the parents created him with the intention of killing him. That's true even if this practice that brought him into existence exists for the purpose of killing him ultimately, right? And you might wonder, okay, maybe that's true of animals that are humanely farmed. Maybe animals have a right to life. Just like you think the kid whose parents are going to kill him before he turns 3, well, he has a right to life, even if his parents created him and have given him a nice life so far and stuff. Maybe animals are the same way. The animals who are humanely farmed, it's true, they owe their existence to this practice that involves them being killed. Maybe nonetheless they have a right to life, and that makes it wrong to kill them. Nozick suggests, okay, well, maybe you want to defend humane farming without endorsing humane baby farming by endorsing a view that he calls utilitarianism for animals, Kantianism for people. So the basic idea behind this view is that utilitarianism is true for animals, whereas Kantianism is true for people. So the idea is you should maximize well-being as far as you can without violating anyone's rights. So you want to produce as much good as you can, but without violating anyone's rights. And only human beings have rights. The idea here is, on this view, factory farming is wrong because it doesn't maximize well-being, right? It causes tremendous suffering to animals without, equally weighty benefits to us. It implies that the couple in the thought experiment acts wrongly if they kill their kid because you're only allowed to promote the good insofar as you can do so without violating rights, and the kid has a right to life. But it would imply that humane farming isn't wrong because it says animals don't have rights, they just have utility, and so if you can kill an animal and not thereby decrease the amount of happiness in the world, maybe humane farming actually increases the amount of happiness because it creates these additional animals that are happy. Then utilitarianism for animals says that you can do that. Okay, but whether this view is plausible, utilitarianism for animals, Kantianism for people, that depends on whether there's some plausible explanation for, well, why is it that human beings have a right to life and animals don't? The argument for marginal cases that Norcross gave suggested that there is no plausible basis for this. It suggested that no, animals and humans, any account you would try to give of why humans have a right to life and animals don't actually is going to exclude babies too. The question for this sort of position is whether there's some plausible explanation for how it is that human beings have rights and animals don't. Nozick actually rejects, he invents utilitarianism for animals, Kantianism for people, but then he rejects it. He thinks, no, that can't quite be right. Here is a final way that you might go about trying to defend humane farming. Or more specifically, trying to defend buying humanely farmed meat. This is from the philosopher Abelard Podgorski. So this defense actually grants that the farmer is wrong to kill the animal. But it suggests maybe you, the consumer, do nothing wrong in purchasing the farmer's product. He himself doesn't quite think that it shows this, actually. He thinks, well, it shows that you don't harm any animals by purchasing the product, and then he thinks that might vindicate humane farming, but we're going to treat it as an argument in favor of humane farming. So how is this? You might think, well, generally, if it's wrong for someone else to do something, it's wrong for you to pay them to do it, right? So if it's wrong for the farmer to kill the animal, it seems like it's wrong for you to pay them for the meat, isn't it? But here's the thought. If you buy humanely raised meat, what animal are you wronging? The animal whose meat you buy is already dead, right? Assuming, you go to Whole Foods and you look at the meat in the cases or whatever, or you're at the farmer's market or whatever. The animal's meat you buy is already dead. If you don't buy the meat, it's not like the animal is going to come back to life. Furthermore, you're not harming the animals that are currently on the farm. They are going to be killed no matter what you do. During COVID, there were supply chain issues, and they couldn't, get all. There were these stories about like pigs who had been being farmed, and they couldn't get them to the slaughterhouse and stuff, so they just killed them by, burying them or something. Because if it turns out, demand for meat drops, you're not gonna just keep raising the animals that are currently on your farm. That loses you money. You're going to kill them. And even if the meat goes to waste, that's better for you to have it go to waste than to keep supporting some animal, right? So the only way that your purchase can make a difference is if it affects the size of future generations of farmed animals, right? What your purchase might do is cause the farmer to say, okay, demand is going up, I need to raise more animals. And so next time he raises 101 chickens instead of 100 or something. Now in the case of factory farmed animals, they are being treated so badly, it seems bad to make there be more of them, right? They have lives that are worse than nothing. But in the case of a humanely farmed animal that has a good existence, you might think, look, the only effect my action can possibly have is that it causes animals that have lives that are good on balance to come into existence. It's too bad, maybe, that the farmer is going to kill them, but I can't do anything about that, right? I can't cause them to come into existence and not be killed. All I can affect is whether they come into existence and get some amount of good life. And maybe you think, okay, well, that sounds good, doesn't it? That sounds morally good, causing beings who will have, on balance, good lives to come into existence. So maybe we could frame the argument in this way. If an action is better for everyone affected than any other action I can perform, it's not wrong. That premise sounds plausible, doesn't it? An action is better for everybody than any other thing I could do. Oh, wow, great. Buying humanely raised meat is better for everyone affected than any other action I can perform. Because the thought is, buying the humanely raised meat, all it can do is cause some animal to come into existence with a nice life in the future. And that's better for that animal than not causing it to come into existence, right? Therefore, buying humanely raised meat isn't wrong. Now, one immediate problem, I guess I said in coming lectures we were going to talk a lot about babies. I guess in this lecture we're talking a lot about babies too. One immediate problem is you might think, well, suppose somebody was humanely farming babies, and they give the babies nice lives before they kill them and so forth. And I think, well, all I can't affect whether this dead baby in front of me lives or dies. I can't help any of the babies currently there. All I can affect is whether other babies come into existence in the future that have, on balance, nice lives. Well, I mean, supporting the humane baby farming industry, that seems wrong, doesn't it? And so, and yet, it looks like that passes the P1 test if humane meat passes the P1 test, right? Because, the whole thought here was bringing into existence an individual with a pleasant life, gets killed prematurely, but can't do anything about that. Can this work if can the diner's defense of humane meat work if the analogous defense of humane baby farming doesn't work? And that might bring us back around to just the same question about utilitarianism for animals, Kantianism for people, right? If there's something about human beings that means that they need to be treated in some way that fundamentally is different morally from animals, then okay, maybe that makes humane baby farming wrong, even though humane animal farming isn't wrong. On the other hand, if there isn't some such thing, we can't find any such thing, then we might think these things have to stand or fall together. We might also, and this is going to be the close of the lecture, we might also revisit the question of what utilitarianism for animals really involves. Tyler John and Jeff Sebo, I know both of these guys, they're utilitarians, but they condemn humane farming even, at least for, that kills animals. And if their argument works, it might defeat all of the arguments we've talked about, all three of the arguments we've talked about in this lecture. Here's what they want to say. They agree that, in principle, in an ideal situation, utilitarianism might allow humane farming. A utilitarian might think, look, it causes happy animals to come into existence. That increases the amount of happiness in the world. Sounds good. But they think that, in practice, utilitarians should oppose humane farming in the real world. Why is that? Well, here's the way to think about it. I think I maybe have mentioned before this idea that sometimes consciously pursuing a goal is not the best way to achieve the goal. Sometimes consciously pursuing a goal can be self-defeating. If you want to fall asleep, the best way to fall asleep is not lay in your bed and try really hard to fall asleep. The best way to fall asleep is to kind of do something else that indirectly causes you to fall asleep. If you want to be happy in your life, the best way to be happy is not to only care about your own happiness, right? You have to care about other people and other things and for their own sake, and that will make you happy in a way that a totally self-centered person who only cares about themselves is probably not going to be happy, and so forth. They suggest that the plan to eat animals only when it benefits the animals might be like this. In theory, a utilitarian would say, yeah, okay, I guess in an ideal situation, that sounds good. You're going to create more happiness by eating the animals. But they think in practice, you're going to do better at benefiting animals if you don't try to do that and instead you just decide to be vegan. And they have two reasons for this. First of all, they think that there are kind of psychological effects to eating meat. that makes it difficult for people to really see animals as morally valuable. And they cite a lot of research. So for instance, if you have people come into the study room and you offer them a snack, and the snack is beef jerky, or if the snack is nuts, the people who eat beef jerky, if you ask them about how morally important cows are, they rate cows as less morally important than the people who have just eaten peanuts. Or if you describe to people some fictional animal, and you say, hey, there's this animal in this other country that is like this, you describe the animal, and the only thing that you change about it is whether people eat it. When you tell people that people eat the animal, even though otherwise the description is exactly the same, they rate it as like less intelligent and less emotionally sensitive and so forth. What happens is people don't really like the idea of eating morally valuable individuals, and so they sort of rationalize. If people eat meat, then that causes them to change their beliefs about whether animals are morally valuable to try to reconcile cognitive dissonance, basically. This is what Sibo and John are thinking. And so it causes people to think that animals are less morally valuable than they otherwise are. And they're thinking, look, in the long run, that's going to be bad if people tend to think that animals are less morally valuable. That's going to make it harder to overcome things like factory farming or, other things that really hurt animals a lot. Second, they think, actually, people who decide that they're only going to eat humane meat, those people are actually much more likely to eat inhumane meat than are vegans. And they cite some research to support this. So people who say that they're all only going to eat humane meat, a lot of times often wind up sort of cheating a little bit and eating some factory farm meat too. Maybe it's sort of psychologically easier to go cold turkey, I guess. Also, they think on a larger scale, lots of humane farms are really not so humane, and it's very hard to regulate them. And if you imagine trying to replace factory farm meat production in general with humane farming so that there's a whole lot more of it, then it would be even harder to regulate them. And so, having lots of supposedly humane farming, they worry, will actually lead to a lot of inhumane farming in practice. And so the first worry they have is about its effect on our attitudes. The second worry they have is about whether we're actually only going to be doing humane farming or only supporting humane farming. And they think between those two things, really, it's better to just not mess around with any of that. It's better to just be a vegan, and they think that, from a utilitarian perspective, will be better for animals in the long run. So, I don't know if that's right or not. I mean, it depends on a lot of kind of complicated empirical claims, doesn't it? But I suggest this just to say, even if you are a utilitarian, even if you accept utilitarianism for animals and for everybody else, maybe it's not obvious what you should say about the humane farming question because of these other factors that they want to bring up. So, I don't know. I mean, I think this whole humane farming thing is very morally puzzling in a lot of ways. A lot of these arguments this argument seems awfully good, doesn't it? Like, yeah, if an action is better for everybody, then surely it's not wrong. And yet, they have very troubling consequences sometimes. It's hard to come up with a position on this topic that really makes sense. And that might be true of some of the other topics that we discuss in coming weeks too. So I will say, next time we're going to start in on a discussion of abortion ethics. And after that, it's kind of up to you guys what we talk about. So I'm going to put out a little survey, and people can do the little survey. I'll do this hopefully tomorrow or Wednesday. People can do the little survey and can indicate what they would like to talk about for the final few weeks of the class. And then I'll put together what we're going to do at the end. But next, it's going to be abortion. Yeah.